Hi all, I have an absolutely amazing game of Richard Reti to show you today. So Richard Reti was one of the leading hypermodernists. The hypermodernists basically created useful exceptions around classical theory. If you want to check out my Evolution of Style series, I have a number of videos about Nimzowitsch and Reti. So they were like two of the most well-known hypermodernists. So this game I'm going to show you today is 1923 Vienna tournament. Richard Reti is playing white against Albert Becker. In this year he's working on his book. He released his book Modern Ideas in Chess, which I have, and I also have his other book Masters of the Chessboard. So these are absolutely brilliant books by Reti. He kind of looks at his opponents and tries to establish their fundamental kind of stylistic characteristics. So he was a real researcher fundamentally into playing style. He used to be a mad hacker with everyone else in the Romantic era with the King's Gambit and stuff like that. But he is now known, his main legacy is the Reti opening, which is a non-committal pawn move. So it starts with knight f3. So this is round 6 against Albert Becker. Knight f3, the Reti opening as played by Richard Reti. So knight f6 was played. And actually we transpose. It has great transpositional capability, the Reti opening. It transposes in this particular instance into the English opening symmetrical. g3, g6, both sides fianchetto, knight c3, knight c6, d3, black castles, and now bishop e3. This is a little bit odd, it seems, in terms of modern opening theory. Quite often white just castles here, routinely castling kingside. Reti is a bit naughty in this game. Maybe he's still a bit of a mad hacker, and although it's a positional opening, maybe he didn't fancy this type of positional plan, which is often seen today, what I might call wet lettuce sometimes, because it seems mostly harmless white's trying to play on pawn structure. But Nigel Short said, you know, pawn structure's fine, something to the effect of pawn structure's fine or positional play's fine, but checkmate ends the game, something to that effect. So does Richard Reti castle here? No, he plays bishop e3. So what does black do about the c5 pawn? Well, black played d6. It turns out black might be able to sustain the wrath of the light square bishop and even played b6 here. Knight e5, that could be safely ignored, and even if white inflicts doubled pawns, they're of no significance. If white doesn't inflict double pawns, then that's absolutely fine for black. And if white does, in fact, black might even be better here. The dynamics favour black with a nice clamp on d4. So the whole bishop e3 might not be that convincing even for b6, but d6 was played here. And we have a move which delays castling again, takes away g4 for the knight, so the bishop at least can't be harassed with knight g4, which might be useful for black at some point. And yeah, is this a bit cagey where the white king is residing at the moment? We see Albert Becker playing bishop d7, and now queen d2, so creating a battery, saying basically I'm going to exchange off your king's defensive piece, your primary king's defensive piece, and try and leave these dark square weaknesses behind. Okay, so rook b8, and in fact white goes for it, bishop h6, knight e8. Now this move is very interesting. It does encourage white a little bit more. The forceful move doesn't look too clever to take on h6, to take as a mistake, as they say, but under these circumstances it seems black might actually have knight d4 with a strong idea of knight f5, so maybe even this could be a way of parrying the attack and carrying on with the queen side. It should be about even. So there are various ways of actually playing this position at this key juncture. But knight e8 was chosen. And the thing is with white's play, Richard Reti has been non-committal, not just for the first opening move, not moving a pawn committally, but with his king. Where does his king reside? Where would he want to attack? This ignites the idea of playing very aggressively here. Can you guess, if I give you 5 seconds, what does white play here? Okay, white plays h4. He's become a mad hacker all of a sudden. He's using the h-file for some sort of hack attack. Now, black played bishop g4 to try and dissuade h5. On knight f6, it's a bit too late to just go back here. h5 is actually quite crushing. For example, like this, bang, rook takes h5, queen g5, too much pressure on g7 here. Black would end up getting mated. And in this line, it's pretty critical. If rook e8, then the instruments of attack are shown with the white queen plunging onto dark squares, and black is getting torn to shreds here, king safety wise. There's just no way black could defend this type of position. It's going to be dreadful. Black could end up losing material, etc., being chased around the board. So bishop g4 was the defensive try here. And now we have h5 just going on with h5, trying to open up these lines. So yeah, positional opening, but he shows you don't have to play it positionally all the time. If you're in the mood for a mad hack attack, go for it, depending on mood. G takes h5 was played. On bishop takes h5, okay, the job's done. The rook's kind of positionally activated. Sometimes you don't have to justify these things in the short term. It's just a lot of piece activity on opportunity related to that piece opportunity, piece activity opportunity. So say this position, white could probably build up on the h-file, and it looks very pleasant and very very dangerous for black. After a move like knight d5, there's no e6 because of knight takes f6. So what does black do? And in fact, in this kind of scenario, it looks as though black might have bolstered down g4 against g4 in the h-file, but it turns out, from an engine point of view, actually d4 is a nice shift to actually put pressure to expose the weakness of the queen being loose, this position, because here d takes, there's knight takes f6. So this could get nasty in other ways for black. And if black, say, plays rook b7, then yeah, the rook can even come in the game like this, and there's a pawn majority over here, there's good pressure over here. So this is actually quite nice for white as well, prospects on both sides of the board. So there are other ways of playing the position. It doesn't have to all crash through the h-file by force. Okay, so black in this very difficult position, facing this horrendous looking attack, plays g takes h5, which fractures the pawns clearly, and actually it weakens this key diagonal, which is immediately seized as an opportunity, well, fairly soon actually, with the move knight h4. So that unveils the bishop to actually use the e4 pivot square to look at h7. And this is actually very nasty. This is in conjunction with moves like f3 and g4 later. This could be very nasty targeting of h7. Black played queen d7, bishop e4. Knight d4 was played. Now, this is a very, very tricky position. There are ideas of hitting the bishop with tempo as well with f3. So, for example, a6, f3 is dangerous. If f5, bishop takes c6. This kind of thing, that wins a piece. And here, if the bishop went back, g4 is strong. With the bishop on e4, this is actually quite lovely, controlling both d5 and f5 and eyeing h7. This is a very lovely attacking construction and could result in stuff like this, where the black king is under siege and gets checkmated. So there are lots of interesting things going here. Instead of hg there, if knight d4, white could castle queenside, the perk of not committing the king, so the rooks can get up to no good on the king side here, for example like this, pinning the bishop. And white's attack is really super strong here. It persists. The rooks and the queens the two rooks and the queen are really crashing through just easily. So we have knight d4, white castles queenside. Black tries for some counterplay here with b5. There's no, you might think, isn't this a responsibility tactically to hold the bishop? Can the queen be distracted away from h6 instead of b5? What about knight takes e2, you might ask? Well, white just plays knight takes, and here bishop takes g7, and that's going to be brilliant for white. This is just mowing down the pieces there, threatening horrible things. So for example, this is devastation. So there's no distraction of the bishop held by the queen at the moment. So b5, f3, and now b4. So trying to nudge the knight away from e2, and the distraction tactic is kind of employed here. But before we look at this idea of knight takes e2 again, which as played, the knight here is actually, this is quite a nifty move, trying to undermine this central knight and offer a pawn just to get the black pieces on the queen side away from the king. So very nifty idea, knight b5 hitting d4. So let's say knight takes, just to put this on the board, bishop takes, and this is just a piece up with a compensation of a winning attack as well. If a6, again, knight takes fg, yeah. So black has to really do something to try and get at least something for this piece, which is attacked, and plays knight takes e2, trying to lure the queen away from h6. So here, if queen takes e2, bishop takes h6, and the key thing is it's check, and then the bishop can go back, and black would have the advantage there. So actually, king c2 was played after knight e2 check. Knight takes e2 check, king c2. And we have black collecting as many pawns as possible. Knight takes g3. The problem with these pawns in this opposite side casting scenario is that the rooks will lap up the open lines sometimes and the other pieces for the attack. So that piece is taken. And now black plays knight takes e4. Knight takes h1 doesn't do much better after bishop takes queen h6, looking at h7. And if f5, just crashing through like this, it's absolutely devastating. White's just a piece up here, and black has to defend. So knight takes e4 was tried, d takes, and as well as white technically being a piece up, okay, the knight's pretty stranded over here at the moment, but the key thing is the attack on the king side. This is at least bottling up any issues with white's king safety, even if it is going to be won. But it will take black far too much time, surely, to try and do something winning this knight and trying to defend the king. Queen e6 is tried, and then we have this juicy looking knight f5. Knife f5, as some GMs call it. When you have a knight on f5, it's Kasparov's favourite place for a knight, an attacking knight. We have queen takes c4 check. If bishop takes h6, then just queen takes h6. For example, this position, knight takes e7 check, is actually moving the king away from the defense of the rook. Bang, queen takes f8 mate. So yeah, this is just horrendous, these lines here. If queen takes e4 check, doesn't do much better, king a1, and white's crashing through. If that's the best move, then that's not a good sign. So yeah, so queen takes c4 check was tried, king b1, queen takes e4 check. So black is really mowing down all the pawns. What have they done for black? Black's got a big collection of pawns. The problem with this position is his king after h takes g4. So in fact, black has all the pawns. Look, every single pawn, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. White's down to 2 pawns. And they accused me of losing my pawns. Richard Reti did it, 1923. He lost all his pawns. The important thing here, the important issue, is black's king safety. If rook takes b5, then bishop takes g7, queen g5. This is crushing. There's an overload on e7. The queen can't go to d4. If she goes to f6, knight takes e7 check, winning the queen. That's winning. So h takes g4, bishop takes, getting rid of that key defender. One of the early points of bishop e3 and queen d2 to try and weaken black on those dark squares. Knight takes g7, king takes check, and now black is pretty defenseless after this. Rook dg1. Everything's coming together here. It's only the queen that can really help try and stave off being mated, it seems. The king tries to help himself with king h8. So if f5, unfortunately that blocks the queen from h7 and checkmate. So limited defensive resources here. So we have king h8. Rook takes g4. Black is in huge trouble here. So the rook is not only attacking the queen here, it's also combining on a common square of attack with the queen, letting the queen play queen g7, checkmate, if g7 is not protected or something else is done immediately. The problem is the two rooks really help the queen on h7 as well. This one helps on h7. So if the queen goes to e5, then just queen takes h7. So it's either h7 or g7. Not very nice options for black here after rook takes g4. So black tries queen takes h1 check. Pretty desperate move. Giving up the queen. In this position, black played rook g8, but just for sake of argument, black tried to take that knight off, because black does have rather a lot of pawns. Better than queen h6 here, which seems tempting. Black might be able to play rook g8 and play on a few more moves. The best move is actually to set up a battery with rook h4. And if king g7, then this is going to be winning material at least. For example, like that. That'll be very, very clear. And yeah, there's no real defense to rook h4 here. If f6, then rook takes h7. And now queen h6 threatening mate with queen g7. And if rook f7, then there's rook h8 checkmate. So it seems, yes, after queen takes h1, black is not really able to take on b5 and tries a rook g8 here. And after rook takes g8, the game ended here. If it continued, for example, well, white's just a queen up basically. There's nothing for black to do. We've got past a pawn as well, just to be more convincing. So yeah, after rook takes g8, that was it. The game ended here. A very interesting game by Richard Reti. I think the key things demonstrated is he was a bit cagey, mysterious about where his king was going to reside. He felt like playing a nice attacking game instead of more positional. So this non-committal king did eventually commit to queenside casting with an h4 hack attack style game, resulting quite entertaining there. I hope you'll agree. If you want to study the Reti opening, there's an interactive course at Chessball, short and sweet, absolutely free to check out. So that's really good to check out. A lot of call lines by an international master. And actually, the main Reti book, let me just show you the two links. So the two main links I want to share with you, the main Reti course is this one, which there is a hell of a lot of lines to study. And there's a short and sweet version if you want the core lines, so just 20 core lines, the short and sweet. So that's that S&W link there in that bit.ly. So 20 core lines, you can get to grips. So it avoids many theoretical lines, avoids simplification early on, strategic and uncommon at club level, so it makes it a good surprise weapon. So I was checking out these, and this is the model game there, Richard Reti, Albert Becker. So I hope you get something from that, and check out this overall, this absolutely brilliant, short and sweet, free to use course. Okay, thanks very much.